I'd like to say that military-connected students are often camouflaged on our campus, and that's not a pun, it's a truth. And we think faculty and staff can benefit from knowing who they are and how many they are, but we think it's even more important for the students themselves to realize they're not alone. And on many of our campuses, they're a sizable population, and they can find community and help each other as they go. I know you have their bios in your handout, but I'm going to briefly introduce our panel. Starting on my right, Dr. Joe Ludo, former Dean and Provost and Interim President of Ohio State. Dr. Amy Thompson, the Provost at Wright State University. Gretchen Klingler, who is the Senior Veterans Manager at the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. She is a veteran and a former military-connected student. And Representative Brian Stewart, representative of the 12th District of the Ohio House of Representatives, practicing attorney, veteran, and also a former military-connected student. Thank you all for being here today. So I'm going to start with you, Joe, because you're on my right. But if you would tell us a little bit, how and why did you get involved with this issue and with military-connected students on our campuses?
Thanks very much, Ken. I've been involved informally with veterans all of my professional career. In fact, I was telling Ken earlier, my first teaching job in the university was in 1974, and I was assigned 2 students to work with on a special research project I had. One flew Phantom fighter jets off an aircraft carrier in the Vietnam War, and the other was just a grunt. And I got to know them up close in terms of what they were like, what their skills were, what their uncertainties were as they came back into the academy. The irony is, or the wonderful part of that story is that both of them finished up their PhD programs and became outstanding scholars at Big Ten universities. And today I look back on that and I said, unfortunately not Ohio State. I want to get across 2 messages, and I'll be as quick as I can. The first is that in order to successfully support veterans, the effort has to be multidisciplinary and cut across all the administrative structures that exist in universities. Because it involves a whole host of issues. It involves housing. It involves understanding the pressures that they're having. It involves simple things like making sure that they're getting their GI Bill payments done on time. Because if they don't, that interferes with their ability to move forward in programs. The willingness to reach across boundaries and not just say veterans are a problem for Department A or Department B, but to really say it's a systemic issue and a systemic opportunity for every university. It has to be seen in that interdisciplinary sense. And far too often it's seen as just the responsibility of one office at the university, and if there are problems, it's nobody else's issue. That cannot continue at universities. Now I want to turn for a minute and say, why should universities be really interested in this issue other than for a general societal benefit? Well, let me give you 4 reasons why they should be, and I'll start from the very beginning. 62% of our veterans group are first-generation students. How many of you have been at universities who claim that their claim to fame is they have first-generation students? If that's the goal, this is an incredible population to work with. 48% of the undergraduates, veterans who are undergraduates, are over the age of 30. The typical proportion is 20% of those undergraduates who are not veterans are under the age of. It's a different population with different kinds of issues, different kinds of expectations, different histories. And if universities can't adjust to that, then there's something fundamentally wrong with the institutions themselves. 47% of veterans engage in universities have children. 22% of the typical undergraduate students have children. And that means a whole different infrastructure that's needed if we're going to be successful in allowing those veterans to achieve the goals that they wish, and that universities have as a part of their core mission. And the last one I'll give you is that 40% of our veterans report as Black, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, or other minority groups. Every university I'm aware of today claims it's doing its best to get minorities into their institutions to help spread the value, the impact of getting a college degree. Veterans give you an automatic in on that. It gives you an automatic advantage if that's the institutional goals. And those are the kinds of arguments that have to be made when you're talking to universities about why they ought to be paying attention to recruiting, sustaining, and supporting veterans. It goes beyond just a moral obligation that we all have. And that's my message to you today, and I just stop at that.
Thank you. Let me open up to the rest of the panel on your last point. Why is it important for universities to engage with this group beyond just processing their GI Bill?
Sure, absolutely. And this is a group that has many unique needs, and student success is what we do at universities, and really making sure that we are helping these students transition to the university, having successful wraparound services for them, looking at their sense of belonging, creating space for them. I'm really proud of our Veterans and Military Center that we have at Wright State as we look at where we're positioned, of course, in Dayton and being located right by Wright-Patt Air Force Base. As you think about, all the things that military-connected students, dependents, et cetera, are coming with, PTSD, mental health issues, just looking at time management and coming from a structured environment. Those are all things that we want to make sure that we're kind of doing professional development with, looking at student success, making sure that we're wrapping our arms around them and also helping them to connect to other military connected individuals. That sense of belonging, that sense of community is really important for them in order for them to be successful.
Well, thank you. And, I think going back to Ohio State. I went to Ohio State first in 2002, I was a senior in high school on 9/11. And I'd already been accepted to Ohio State and said, well, I probably should go. And, but got to campus and just, everything going on in the world, kind of had a thought of, was in the wrong place at the wrong time for me personally. So my mom prefers it for me to say that I left college, I dropped out, and enlisted for active duty in the Army, actually at the recruiting station at Ohio State. And I walked in, and the recruiter at Ohio State said, you want to go in the Guard, right? And you want to go in the reserves, right? You're going to stay in school. And I said, well, actually, I think I'm just going to leave school for a little bit. And he was kind of surprised by that, but did 3 years on active duty, was in the infantry, deployed to Iraq, and then was looking at what's next in life. And Ohio State was very good at welcoming us back. And I tell the story, coming back to college in 2006, was kind of on the front edge of the kind of returning veteran wave. And so I remember I took a test before I got out of the Army, and you could give that transcript to Ohio State, and Ohio State was very good about saying, well, here's the credits that we know you have, and then they said, and here's all the stuff that we don't really know what to do with. But we'll tell you what, if you go around and talk to the individual departments, they might be able to give you credit in this space or that space. And so that made for a pretty fun summer of 2006. I convinced the philosophy department to give me credit for Intro to Logic based on having done basic training and talked about the Geneva Convention and all those kinds of things. And graduated Ohio State, undergrad, stayed for law school, and then was kind of on the front edge of the first class that got to try to take advantage of the post 9/11 GI Bill. And I remember the Moritz College of Law being sort of very willing to help, but it was all very new and just I think veterans coming out of the military kind of expect a certain level of interaction, a certain level of discipline and organization, and as long as that communication is ongoing, I think we're certainly used to bureaucracy. We're certainly used to paperwork and the rigmarole that goes with that. Why do I think veterans are important in the classroom? I think there's a perspective that we bring that is not represented as much amongst the broader class. I remember, coming out, being a 23-year-old former infantryman in a class full of 18 and 19-year-olds who came straight out of high school. It's just kind of night and day life experience. During my first year back at Ohio State, I took a break because I got a call that said that my best friend and my team leader, who had deployed in the next deployment after me, were killed on the same day in the same attack. And so took time off school to go to Arlington National Cemetery. We have to schedule classes around VA medical appointments. Had to schedule classes around VA appeals successfully, fighting determination on back injuries and the like. So it's just a we talk a lot about diversity of viewpoint, I think, is equally important, if not more important. And so to have that perspective in the classroom represented, I think was a good thing. Also, I don't know very many veterans who came back and went to college and I think we need to appreciate that we're competing with a lot of other options. You know, the military will tell you, you know, you can go into law enforcement, you know, you can go into the trades, you can go into the workforce immediately. You know, why go spend 3 years at Ohio State racking up, you know, tens of thousands of dollars of debt when you could, you know, be working tomorrow and supporting your family. I had a wife when I came back to Ohio State. And so we're competing for those students. And if the students who choose to come to college, I think very few of them who graduate become sort of meek backbencher members of society. The veterans that I graduated with, generally speaking, I think have kind of that extra gear. They're leaders in their companies, they're leaders in their schools, they're leaders in their communities, and you know, a few misguided souls become leaders in government as well. And so I think that there is value in, if we can attract those veterans to go to school, you're getting sort of what I would kind of describe as like a super graduate, right? Somebody who's going to be an ambassador for that, for the higher education system in that university, that I think is pretty high profile and is ready to go make a difference in our communities.
I just wanted to touch briefly on the interconnectedness of the way that campuses work for traditional college students coming out of high school, and then also for students like myself, where I went back to college at the age of 28. I, of course, at that point had lived on my own, so I did not want to go live in the dorms, where I knew things. Having gone to college shortly previously, I knew how dorm life was going to be, and it was not going to be something for me. Although I do know a few veteran students who chose to go back to college and live in the dorms. But so the way that the traditional college experience is set up, you leave your parents' house, you go to college, you live in a dorm, you take classes, maybe you have a part-time job on campus, maybe you participate in a campus club. For some of the things have already been touched on, but many of us have marriages and families, children. We're working to support ourselves financially, as well as trying to excel in our academics and be stand out as well, because the way that campus clubs tend to be created are strictly focused on the younger demographic. And I will touch on this hopefully later. But the interconnectedness of the campus community and offices, such as military and veteran offices, scholarships are extremely important for student veterans and military-connected students, because often we are supporting ourselves financially. Suicide prevention at campuses are often looking at the younger demographic that have left their parents' house, and they're experiencing being an adult for the first time. And that, as veteran students, we understand that is difficult, having ourselves left home and been far away, usually, from our families, and having had these experiences of both leadership and empowerment, but also experiences of trauma. So all of these interconnected offices, as Joe and some of our other speakers have alluded to, are so incredibly important to be talking to each other and to be working as a team to support our veteran community.
Thanks, Gretchen. Given your perspectives and your backgrounds on this, I want to ask a question for all of you is, why is it important for senior level leadership at universities and legislators to get involved with this cohort, and how can they make a difference?
Well, they begin with the legislature. Most public universities, certainly, all I would imagine, but private universities as well, respond to legislative action. To the extent that it is clear to universities that there are things they should be doing to increase revenues, and that's consistent with their mission, they'll do it. If there's no mention or no discussion, they'll find other ways to spend their time. So this is really a matter from my perspective, the legislature saying this is something that's important, we expect you to pay attention to it, and asking questions. It doesn't mean draconian efforts being taken, but it means constantly asking the questions so it stays in the forefront of planning that takes place at the institution. The other comment I'd like to make is that my own view is there's a piece of fundraising that's missing at most universities. There ought to be a concerted effort to raise private and foundation funds to support veterans, and there isn't. It's handled on an ad hoc basis with individual donors who may come in and say, I have an interest, are you doing anything? And then a university puts together a proposal. It's got to be a conscious thought that takes place and is planned for as part of the effort to increase the resource base that makes it possible to address the interests that we've just heard described, because veterans are different in terms of their needs, both in terms of the talent they bring and also the consequences for the institution. But they need help and support beyond the GI Bill. That's not going to do it. That's enough. That's a start. But that has, as all of you know, all kinds of interesting difficulties with it. But if an institution makes a priority to raise funding to support veterans, they'll find that they have flexible dollars that can be used to address all of the uniqueness that comes with the joy of attracting veterans to an institution.
So I think it's two different things, right? First, for senior leaders, I think it's the importance of showing up and getting to know the veteran students, the military-connected students, and listening and learning about their stories. And I will say this last week, I had an opportunity to just do a focus group with our students, and I left with my life completely changed, hearing their stories and understanding, and I don't come from a military-connected family, but just hearing the importance of our veteran military center brought me to tears. To hear about the importance of that space, and it happens, I'll just give you one example. That space is a secure space for our students. They swipe in to be able to go into that space. And I had one student actually say, who has very severe PTSD, that's the one space that she can go that she feels safe because it's secure and she has to swipe in. And so hearing their stories, understanding their stories, I think as a senior leader is really important, and being in their space and letting them know that as an administrator that I'm there to support them with resources and looking at programs and how to remove barriers for them is incredibly important. And I know when I left, and I've left other events, they are so thankful that I'm a champion for them, and I think that that's really, really important. I will say the other piece of that is learning how to build up our infrastructure at the university. My background just happens to be public health. And so mental health is one of my issues. And I've been working really carefully with our director of our VMC to really build up our mental health services and our support services for our veteran students and for all of our students doing green zone training. Those are the kinds of things I think are really important in modeling and showing up. I think on the legislative piece is being advocates and continuing those conversations with legislators and making sure that there is funding that's available for programs on campuses, and also looking at things that we can do from a policy standpoint, like when someone is moving across the country, as we know that they often do in the military, making sure that they're seamlessly converted to being able to have in-state tuition. I think there's some policy things that we can look at. I think we also know that there's issues with active duty tuition and sometimes deltas in that $250 per credit hour that they're often awarded, but yet tuition might be more if they're in active duty. And so how do we adjust that at universities and working through policy? So I think all of those are things that we could be doing.
I graduated in 2019 from Ohio State, and I want to touch on two things that you had just mentioned that were extremely important to me while I was a student and also continue to impact me now. And one of those things is the importance of a military connected space, a physical space where we can go and we know that we're surrounded by people that have similar experiences to us. For me, that space was the Veterans Lounge at Ohio State. It was, when I first started going in there, it felt like I had found my unit again. It was that experience of being able to walk into a space, know who the people were, get to know what some of their experiences were across branches, and be able to share some of those unique experiences amongst ourselves. I think one of the most challenging things about transitioning from service to school can be feeling disconnected, as we had already mentioned. And one of those, and albeit this may be a little unusual for people who did not serve in the military, but one of the ways that military connected individuals and veteran students share a unique bond can often be through dark humor. We've experienced a lot of difficult things in our lives, and being able to bond through that in a space where people aren't looking at us sideways and going, that was awkward for you to say. But at the same time, everybody else around us laughs because we understand where it comes from, that sometimes to deal with some of the most difficult things that you have, you experience it through humor, even if it is a different form of humor than others. And that tends to move away as we transition out of the military and into our civilian lives. But having that space to be surrounded by people who understand us was so important for me. Secondly, when it comes to senior leadership within universities, one of the ways that I was able to share some of my experiences were through focus groups and qualitative research, and being able to sit down with leadership and saying, hey, this is not only my experience, but here are some other experiences I've heard of from student veterans that are struggling with something, and being able to share that directly with senior leadership. Because having been in the military, I often know that if you tell somebody just above you, sometimes things get filtered as it moves all the way up. And those important stories that leadership need to consider when making decisions don't make it to the top. So being those leaders that sit down with student veterans, with military connected students, and asking, what are your needs? Not just with the leadership, the student veteran leadership, but also the average Joe or Jane that just goes to college, goes to their classes, and go home because they have kids or they have a job that they need to go to. So understanding what veteran leaders on campus need, as well as the Joe or Jane that goes to class, being able to connect with both of those groups can really help our colleges and universities understand what our veteran community needs.
Well, I understood the question to be, how are legislators and university leaders drawn into this question of how we support military students? Obviously, the legislator, I voted for every budget that funds higher education. It's a public university event, and I'll just say, I think in Ohio, obviously, we have a great deal of pride in our public universities. I get that in my district, even for people who have never been to college, right? They still have pride in what Ohio State and Cincinnati and all the others do for our state. They understand that the Wexner Center is a great place for medicine. They understand that Ohio State is an economic driver in Central Ohio in my district, and so there's a pride that comes with supporting our public universities. And I think that as a legislator, that's a partnership that we want and need to continue. The flip side of it is that as a public university, what happens on our public universities, I think, kind of reflects on Ohio, and frankly is given a lot more attention amongst Ohio residents than if it happens at another university. I'm the politician, so I get to rip the Band-Aids off and say things bluntly sometimes, but I think the general public even has a sense of, if something crazy happens at Oberlin, nobody cares, okay? It's just par for the course, all right? But when things happen at Ohio State or Cincinnati or Wright State, it gets more attention, and I think that there is a sense, certainly in this building, that with public dollars come certain public duties, and a public perception matters in how we. It certainly matters, I think, in how we're going to attract or not attract veterans to campus. And I'll just be honest with one example. In 2006, when I came back to campus, if I 6 months having been back from Iraq, saw the things happening at some of our campuses in 2006 that I've seen in the past month, that had given me real pause. That would have affected, where I choose to go and whether I choose to go at all. I think that we have to be mindful of the message that's being sent and the messages that sometimes are not being sent. When you have, a professor from a taxpayer-funded university at a rally in front of the State House saying, from the river to the sea and long live the Intifada, that reflects on Ohio and reflects on universities in a way that it doesn't if it's coming from a non-public university. And I think when you're talking to veterans who have certain views and have certain ideas about what they want to do with the rest of your life, we have to be cognizant of the messages that we're sending, and as legislators, the messages that we're sort of that we're funding as a result, because people have a lot of ways to vote with their feet. And if veterans start to say that, a campus that has professors who send out Hamas paraglider graphics to promote rallies that say from the river to the sea, is that where I want to go? And I don't want to see that in the minds of our veterans as they continue to say what they want to do with the rest of their professional lives. So I think we do have to be cognizant of that in the public space.
Let me just make one comment. I tend to think of numbers because that's just the way I am, and I focus on numbers. Let me talk about a non-number issue. And that is one of the reasons I think we ought to be spending time bringing more veterans into universities and supporting them while they're there, is that they really add a richness to the learning experience of all other students. And it's something we forget. They have had experiences that very few other students have had. Students who've been protected, wonderfully so, by parents who care, are now dealing with individuals who have seen things, have been to parts of the world that they've only read about and know nothing about. And these individual veterans have intense personal feelings about those issues. They also have unique problems. And by the way, those are problems that our students are going to encounter all through society. And they have to learn how to deal with that and to be supportive of individuals who are going through those events. So there's an enrichment piece, which we tend to lose in the numbers, where we just talk about why we just want more people and we count the number of veterans we want. But it's what they add to the educational experience that, to me, is so critical and so valuable as we go forward.
Let me start this next question with Gretchen and Brian, but everyone feel free to jump in. Are there specific programs that were available to you when you were transitioning to campus, and then also as you were transitioning off campus?
When it comes to programs that were available when I transitioned to campus, I can think of 3 that were extremely valuable to me. One was having access to the Office of Military and Veteran Services, knowing that their doors were open for me to ask questions directly to them about the GI Bill, about what it was going to cover, about being able to declare a double major, to separate my double major and to declare a dual major, to add minors. What does that look like for my GI Bill? What am I going to have to potentially pay for? As well as for them to be a sounding board for somebody who may have had really good experiences in certain classes, and then in other classes, not so much, to ask for advice. So that was one. The second one for me was the Student Veterans of America organization, where I was able to serve as president of our campus group for a couple years. And the leadership opportunities that offered, not just on campus, but forums I could attend nationwide, developing my professional network of veterans that I continue to utilize to this day. And third, I would say, would be the military community advocate program that I was involved with. It gave me leadership opportunities and made me feel empowered to take on those challenges that our student veterans were facing in unique ways. Example, I had one friend of mine now who was a woman veteran, and she said that she felt like she was just done with the veteran community, with the military community. She didn't want to be involved. She was tired of what she referred to as the machismo community that she had been involved in. And of course, both of us had been in fields that were largely women minorities in our military time. So having heard her experience, I was able to introduce her to Student Veterans of America, to create programming through being the Women Veterans Advocate at Ohio State, and give her opportunities to meet other women veterans, to meet other individuals who didn't have the mindset of, women do certain things in the military, men do certain things in the military. Pretty much everything's open to women now in the military, which is amazing. But when we were both serving, that wasn't necessarily the case. So the Military Community Advocate Program was just an incredible experience to be able to meet the needs of the community I was serving in unique ways that empowered me as a leader. And they're lessons I continue to use to this day.
I think it's an encouraging contrast between somebody who graduated in 2019 and somebody who graduated in 2007, because a lot of those acronyms and clubs and things, and I'm not to be critical, but again, they were kind of getting stood up back in 2006. And so my experience was a little more like, that's a good idea. We should look at that. That's a good idea. We're starting to do that. I think the fellowship and the clubs aspect is huge. And again, kind of being on the frontward edge of that, I remember there was Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America had like a website and a message board, before, real social media existed. And I remember, meeting other students at Ohio State, and it was almost like a speakeasy. It was like, I hear you're at Haverfield Hall, or you're at this place over here, and you go to Ohio State, and we would just, you'd meet for lunch at a Buffalo Wild Wings. It was all just very sort of word of mouth, and very quickly, I think to our university's credit, started to have some structure and university support and a little more formality to it, and that's just been huge. I was at a wedding, just a few months ago for somebody I met in 2006 on Ohio State campus. He came back. He was a Navy veteran who'd been in Iraq. I was an Army veteran from Iraq, and have stayed in touch ever since. And I think that sense of community really makes our big universities sometimes get a lot more manageable. I think just a point of contact, a coordinator, and I know probably every university has this now, but I think veterans kind of like that face-to-face, one-on-one, who is the one person I can go get an answer from? And if you can do that, I think there's a lot of other hurdles that can be navigated, and make a big university start to feel much smaller and more manageable.
A little bit behind schedule, but are we okay to do some Q&A from the audience? Okay, so any questions from you for the panel? Right here. Oh, just got a microphone, here we go.
Hi, my name is Dave Hibbler. Sorry, a little loud. And I'll try to ask this as eloquently as I can. I'm not too good at public speaking. But I'm a student at OSU. I've been there for quite a long time. In fact, I started back 2 days after our demobilization from Iraq in 2007. It wasn't a long transition. I served with Heath Robinson during our Iraq deployment with the 285th when he was exposed to the burn pits. I've been working with some of the veteran communities at Ohio State University, and we keep on hearing the same call all the time. We need somebody to show us the way. We need mentorship. We need to learn our lessons from the people who've been there, done that, and been successful. This past spring, I was asked to give a presentation on the needs for mentorship in the veteran and military student community. While I was doing that, I looked up some information on success rates of military-associated students. And the information was pre-COVID, so it was a little dated, and it's not accurately reported from all institutions. But of individuals who start at the institutions that report this information using the GI Bill, the success rate ranges between 1% and 20%. That's horrific. We have these individuals who have been highly trained, are highly skilled, have gone through war, battle-tested, hardened in the fires of Iraq, Afghanistan, and wherever else they serve come home, have vast wealth of experience, knowledge, and they can share that. And veterans are veterans for a reason. They want to give back their communities. Our schools have a mandate of giving back to their communities. Can you talk a little bit about the opportunities that are lost and the cost to the students at the universities themselves, and society as a whole, because we don't support these individuals and what they need to transition into school and back out of school? And we are losing all of these super graduates that we could have functioning in our society, and instead they never reach the high levels of achievement that they could have if they would have had that support.
If I could start with that, Mike. So I would say one, absolutely, David, mentorship, not just moving from service to school, but school into your career field is so incredibly important. Because in the military, you have a supervisor that you report to. Your supervisor has a supervisor, and so on and so forth. And you largely have your career path laid out for you if you plan to be in for 20 years. You know what you have to do to make your performance reports. You know what you have to do to make your rank. You know what schools you're going to have to go to continue to progress. But in the civilian world, that doesn't really exist. You can look at other people's resumes or bios to get an idea of where they had performed well or what organizations that they had been a part of. But also, if you don't figure that out for yourself, largely, nobody tells you to do that. Nobody tells you to look through LinkedIn and see what people have done before. Nobody tells you to look at their bios. Nobody says, hey, maybe you should go network with this organization. Utilize your network. Because while we're going to school, we're pretty much thinking of how are we paying the bills, how are we doing in our classes, and what do we have to do to get into next semester. So I would also say that looking further forward versus what is directly in front of you is incredibly important. And it's also something that our communities need to do better at in serving veterans as they're looking at graduating and moving on. I would also, personally, I would advise student veterans in particular, but of course I know we're talking about all military-connected students, to utilize your time wisely and don't just, if you can help it, don't just get a part-time job that you're able to pay the bills on. Get a job that you can build on in whether it's the professional setting, whether you're volunteering with an organization that you can utilize to put on your resume. Frankly, that's in some ways kind of how I am where I am now, is the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. I volunteered with them as a state level advocate. I got to know what advocacy looks like. I got to know what national outreach looks like. And when the position ended up coming open, I had already gotten to know many of the people in leadership because I had reached out and I had connected. And so when the position came open, they reached out and said, hey, would you be interested in applying for this? And I said, absolutely, because this is a volunteer experience that ended up leading to professional development opportunities. But again, if we're not offering these thoughts and these pathways to our student veterans, they may not cross their mind. And so having mentorship moving forward is incredibly important.
I was just going to say a couple things. I think, one, it's incredibly important if you have a Veterans Military Center to actually employ veterans to work in there, because in talking with those students, you kind of have students that are further up the chain that are ready and willing to help kind of reach back and help new students. And I think that mentoring was really key at Wright State for our students. I also think really engaging the faculty is really key. And I know at our university we're doing ally training, which is really important for faculty and staff, and having those conversations of how important it is to have those close relationships with students. But just to echo your point, And talking with our military connected students, the transition piece is just so incredibly difficult for many of these students, and having that structure and learning the time management, and how do you kind of go from I know where I'm going to be and exactly what I'm going to do, and what this all involves, to a completely different life. And so that mentoring piece that you mentioned, I think, is really, really important to hear from people that have been successful and how they did make that transition.
I appreciate the points, and I'm encouraged that obviously we're having this event today, and that the administrators are acknowledging all the things that do make going back to school difficult for returning veterans. And I think any returning veteran who's on the GI Bill who says, my path is a 4-year degree, but I've got an issue at the VA Medical Center and that's affecting my studies. I've got an issue at, PTSD and that's affecting my studies. Anything we can do to make sure that somebody for whom this is the path can stay there is obviously critical. But I also look at those stats, and I think we should also acknowledge that the GI Bill is a wonderful thing. Thank you, taxpayers. It's changed my life. It's changed the course of my family's life. It's a wonderful thing. But there is also a bit of I've seen it with veterans from my own company, which is, well, I have to go to college because I have the GI Bill, right? It's there, it's free money, I have to use it. And some of those guys, that was not the path that they should have been on. And so they go to college, at some point they realize, I want to be in a different field, I want to do something else. To me, it's not so much the 80% that elect not to finish the 4 degree, it's where did they go? What did they do with them? What did they do when they left? I had a budget amendment in the last budget to say that Ohio National Guard scholarship used to be only able to be used for a 2 or 4 year degree. And for anybody who that is the path, I hope they take advantage of that. But my amendment said you can also use that National Guard scholarship to go into an apprenticeship program, to go into the building trades, to go into adult education, to do some other things so that you're still using your education benefits. But I think there is a growing realization in Ohio that college is not for everyone. And we need to make sure that for those that is the path, that they're supported. And maybe it's a bit of a question of, and I know that this is not necessarily the gear that most of our public universities are necessarily used to doing, but for the student who says halfway through, I've used half my GI Bill benefits, but a 4-year degree is not in the cards for me, what can we do to support them too? What can we do to make sure that they're in the trades, in adult education, in a career, something along those lines? And I think that is as important, not just that they didn't finish the degree, but what did they do when they left? And I think that is something that we have a hand as the legislature and hopefully as public universities as well to address.
We have time for one more question. Anyone? Okay, quiet group. Before I thank the panel, I do want to mention, we're talking about transition to college and the time in college, and the next group will be talking about in the workplace. I really ask you to not look at those as two distinct issues. We need to look at this as a continuum. For our veterans to be successful, they need to come back, they need to transition into college, and they need to transition successfully to the workplace. And by having both of those entities work together, it's much more likely that they will succeed in that. So take that lens as you're hearing the next panel and everything you heard from this panel as well, and think about that as we focus our efforts in Ohio. But with that, I'd like to thank the 4 individuals, and please give them a round of applause.